The evening sun burned low over the desert, washing the land in blood and gold. Samuel Harlow rode slow through the dry wind, his horse's hooves stirring the silence like whispers of ghosts. He had spent the day rounding strays, mending fences, and talking to himself, because there wasn't anyone else left to listen. The land was quiet, too quiet, until he saw something by the creek. Something that made his heart stop. A figure lying half in the water, half in the reeds, still as death, her dark hair shining against the dust. He dismounted fast, boots sinking in the mud as he ran to her. She was a woman, Apache by her beads and the ink across her arm, strong even in stillness. Her skin was burnt with the sun, her lips cracked, and her breath so faint he had to bend close to feel it. Samuel didn't know what brought her here or why she'd fallen, but he didn't stop to think. He lifted her gently, surprised by her weight and power, her muscles hard even in weakness, and carried her back toward his horse. Her eyes fluttered as he placed her across the saddle. They were dark, deep like the canyons after rain, and for a second they met his. She didn't speak, didn't struggle, but something in that gaze told him she'd seen more pain than he could imagine. He tied the reins around his wrist, mounted, and rode for the ranch, the dying sun behind him painting the world red, as if warning him this act of mercy would change everything. By the time he reached the barn, the sky had turned black, filled with cold stars. He laid her on a blanket near the hearth and lit a small fire. The woman stirred, her chest rising slow and shallow. He fetched water, poured a bit on her lips, and watched as her mouth moved like she was tasting rain after drought. When she spoke, it wasn't English. The sound was soft, broken, and sad. Samuel just nodded, even though he didn't understand a word. She woke again in the morning. Her eyes opened wide, scanning the room like a hawk. When she saw him standing in the doorway, her hand darted toward her waist, but there was no knife there. He raised both hands, speaking slow, careful. "You're safe," he said. "You were hurt. I found you by the creek." She didn't answer, but her breathing eased a little. He set down a bowl of beans and bread, then stepped back, giving her space like he would a wild mare. She didn't eat right away. She stared at the food, then at him, suspicion heavy in her gaze. Finally, she picked up the bread and tore a piece with strong fingers. Samuel couldn't help but notice her hands, large, calloused, like she'd worked or fought all her life. When she finally spoke, it was quiet, her accent thick. "Why you help me, white man?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Because I ain't one to leave somebody to die." Days passed. She stayed inside, recovering, while he worked outside fixing fences and tending cattle. Every evening he found her sitting near the window, watching the horizon. She didn't talk much, and neither did he. But there was something peaceful in the silence they shared. One night, while he was cooking supper, she said her name for the first time. "Nawona," she said softly, her eyes not leaving the fire. He repeated it under his breath, like a prayer. She looked at him then, almost smiling. Samuel learned that she had escaped a military camp. Her brother had been captured, her people scattered. She'd been running for days, hiding by day, walking by night, until hunger took her down by the creek. He didn't know what to say. He'd heard the stories. Some folks called the Apaches killers. Others said they were just fighting for what was theirs. Samuel looked at her and saw no monster. He saw a person, proud and wounded, same as anyone else trying to survive. The nights grew colder. Sometimes the wind howled so loud the cabin seemed to shake. He offered her the bed, taking the floor himself. But one night, when frost covered the window and the fire burned low, she stood over him and said, "You take bed tonight." He tried to refuse, but she frowned, her voice firm. "You weak from cold, I not steal comfort from man who saved me." He smiled faintly, moved to the bed, and for the first time in months, slept without nightmares. The next morning, she was already outside, tending the horses. He watched from the doorway, surprised by her strength. She moved with power, yet grace, tall as a man, shoulders broad, eyes sharp. The ranch hadn't seen such life in years. She didn't ask permission to work. She just did it. When he thanked her, she said, "I pay for kindness with hands, not words." He laughed softly, and she looked up, confused. Like she hadn't heard laughter in years, over time, the cabin began to feel less like a grave and more like a home. Samuel noticed small things, the way she fixed the saddle straps without being asked, the way she hummed to herself in Apache while cooking, the way she could stare at the sunset for hours, as if it told stories only she could hear. There was a strength in her, not just of body, but of spirit. The kind of strength he'd never seen in any woman or man before. One evening, after supper, she sat by the door, sharpening a blade. Samuel watched her in silence until she said, "You look like man with many words but no tongue." He smiled, shaking his head. "I just ain't good with talking," he said. "Never was." She looked up, her eyes gleaming in firelight. "You think too much. Speak like wind, not stone." Her words hit him harder than he expected. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd spent too long being afraid of saying the wrong thing. That night, as he was putting out the fire, she spoke again, her voice low, almost trembling. "I not been with man in 6 moons," she said, her eyes fixed on the flames. Samuel froze. He didn't answer, didn't move, just waited. "My people gone, my brother gone. I live like shadow." She looked up at him, her gaze fierce but sad. "You not touch me. You not ask. You treat me like woman, not prisoner. I thank you." He swallowed hard, not sure what to say. All he could manage was, "You don't owe me nothin', Nowona." The silence that followed was heavy but soft, filled with something unspoken. She smiled faintly, then said, "You never with woman, yes?" He looked away, embarrassed. "No, ma'am," he muttered. "Ain't never found reason to." She laughed quietly, the sound low and rough like desert wind. "You honest," she said. "Most men talk big. You talk true." He didn't know whether to be proud or ashamed. For the first time in his life, he wished he knew how to be what she deserved. From that night on, something changed. Their eyes met more often. Their words came easier. When she worked beside him in the corral, he caught himself watching her arms move, muscles flexing beneath the sun. When she smiled, the whole ranch seemed brighter. Yet he never crossed a line. Respect was the only language he knew, and he spoke it fluently. She, too, seemed to sense it, that he was different from the men who had taken, burned, and destroyed. She trusted him, slowly, piece by piece. Winter crept in quietly, wrapping the land in silence. The nights were long, the air sharp with frost. Samuel and Nowona shared the cabin's warmth, often sitting near the fire until sleep pulled them apart. Sometimes she told stories of her people, how the stars were ancestors watching, how the coyotes were messengers of fate. He listened, every word like a heartbeat. Once she asked him, "What you see when you look at sky?" He answered softly, "A world too big for one man." She smiled, nodding. "Then you understand." He didn't realize when his loneliness began to fade or when her laughter started to feel like music. All he knew was that the ranch didn't feel empty anymore. One morning he found her fixing the corral fence, her hands rough and bleeding. He rushed over, saying, "You'll tear your skin." She just looked at him and said, "Pain make woman strong." He took her hand anyway, wrapping it with cloth, and she didn't pull away. For the first time, he felt something between them more powerful than words. As the snow began to fall, they grew closer still. They shared stories, silence, and sometimes dreams. She confessed once, staring into the fire, "I thought all white men hate us." He replied, "Most don't know you well enough to hate you." She studied him a long while, then said, "You different." He smiled softly, answering, "Maybe I just been alone too long." She reached out then, touching his shoulder lightly, and in that moment, both of them understood. Loneliness had found its match. The bond between them was quiet, but unbreakable. The nights no longer felt endless. Each glance carried meaning, each word warmth. When she looked at him now, it wasn't as a stranger, but as someone who had given her a second chance at life. And when he looked at her, it wasn't with fear or shame, but with wonder. Wonder that out of all the pain in this cruel land, something so pure could be born. By the time the first thaw came, Samuel knew his world had changed forever. The ranch wasn't just a home anymore, it was a promise. And the woman who had fallen by his creek wasn't a stranger. She was his strength, his storm, and maybe, just maybe, the first person who had ever truly seen him. Spring came like a slow breath over the land, melting snow, waking streams, and filling the air with new life. Samuel stood by the corral, watching Nowona brush down the horses, her laughter carried by the wind. The days had grown easier, but his heart hadn't. Every glance, every touch of her hand left something burning inside him, something he didn't know how to name. Yet he said nothing, because silence felt safer than words that might break what they had built. That evening they sat outside the cabin, watching the sky fade from orange to indigo. The coyotes sang somewhere beyond the hills. Samuel turned to her, his voice low. "When I found you, I didn't know what I was bringing home." She smiled faintly. "And now?" He hesitated, eyes tracing the firelight on her face. "Now I think I found something I didn't know I was missing." Nowona didn't answer right away. She looked at the horizon, where the stars were waking, and said softly, "I think maybe I find same." They stayed like that for a long time, saying nothing more. The desert air wrapped around them, cool and clear, and the world felt still. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I once think I never belong anywhere. My people gone, my home gone. But here," she paused, searching for the right word, "here I feel peace." Samuel's heart thudded in his chest. He wanted to tell her she'd given him peace too, that she'd filled a silence that had been killing him for years. But all he said was, "Then stay." She turned to him, eyes shining in the firelight. "You want that?" He nodded, no hesitation. "More than I've ever wanted anything." For the first time she smiled fully, the kind of smile that carried both strength and sorrow. "Then I stay," she said quietly. "But you must promise, Samuel Harlow, never see me as broken. Never see me as less." He met her gaze, his voice steady. "You're more than I ever dreamed, Nowona. Ain't a thing in this world could make me see you different." The wind rustled through the mesquite, carrying the scent of rain. Nowona looked up, her face soft with wonder. "The sky cry happy tears," she said. "Maybe it no." He laughed gently, shaking his head. "Maybe it does." They sat together as the rain began to fall, light and warm, washing the dust from the land. She leaned closer, resting her head on his shoulder. And for the first time, Samuel didn't feel alone. He felt complete, as if the desert itself had drawn her to him. Two lost souls finally finding home. Days turned to weeks, and their bond deepened. They worked side by side, fixing fences, breaking horses, planting a small garden behind the cabin. Sometimes they didn't speak for hours, and they didn't need to. The silence between them had changed, no longer empty, but full of meaning. Nowona's laughter filled the air, and Samuel found himself smiling without reason. When the neighbors rode by, they looked with curiosity, but said nothing. Folks around here had learned not to question what the land decided to join together. One night, as the moon rose high and silver, Nowona stood by the creek where he'd found her months before. Samuel came up behind her, quiet as the wind. "Funny," he said softly. World brought us back here. She nodded. Life is circle. What leave, come back. He took her hand, rough against his, and held it gently. You saved me too, Nowona, he said. Maybe I didn't know I needed savin', but you did it all the same. She looked at him then, eyes full of light. Then maybe we both live again. The night was still except for the water's whisper. Samuel lifted her hand to his chest, where his heart beat strong beneath the calloused skin. You hear that? He asked. She nodded, smiling. Yes. It sounded like tomorrow. And for the first time since his childhood, Samuel believed there could be one. When dawn came, it found them standing side by side, watching the horizon catch fire with color. The ranch was quiet, but alive, their horses grazing, smoke curling from the chimney, a hawk circling overhead. The world didn't seem so cruel anymore. Nowona turned to him, her voice warm as sunrise. You no longer alone, Samuel Harlow. He smiled, answering softly. And you ain't either, Nowona. The desert stretched before them, vast and golden, full of promise. Somewhere far away, thunder rumbled, soft and distant. Like the heartbeat of the earth, Samuel reached out, took her hand, and together they walked toward the light. And though the world would forget their names, the wind would remember. The rancher who had never known love, and the Apache woman who taught him how to feel alive again.